Cold stars burned above the trade station of Carth Vale, a ring of steel and glass drifting between empires. Ships from 100 species rested in its docks. Merchants argued, soldiers watched, and rumors moved faster than light on this night. The loudest rumor in the station bar was about humans. The bar was carved into the inner wall of the station. Dim amber lights glowed above metal tables. Alien voices filled the air like a storm of strange music. At the center table sat three officers, tall beings with narrow shoulders and pale violet skin. Their eyes shone like liquid silver. One of them leaned back in his chair. "Humans are weak," he said. "Small bones, soft skin, short lives." Another officer clicked his tongue in agreement. "They survive only because they hide behind machines." The third officer laughed softly. "I heard their soldiers panic in the War of Helion. One scream, and they run." Several nearby patrons listened with quiet interest. At the far end of the bar, a human sat alone. His name was Daniel Mercer, former engineer of the Terran fleet, now a simple traveler carrying a worn jacket and a small steel case. Daniel listened to the conversation without turning his head. The bartender placed a glass of amber liquid near him. "You should ignore them," the bartender said quietly. "Kethari pride grows larger when they smell an argument." Daniel nodded slowly. "I have no interest in arguing." The laughter at the center table grew louder. The first officer spoke again. "Look at them. Humans rely on metal shells, and thinking machines take away their tools, and they become frightened animals." The second officer pointed across the bar. "Like that one over there." Many eyes turned toward Daniel. The third officer stood and walked toward him with slow confidence. He stopped beside the human table. "So you are a human traveler," he said. Daniel looked up calmly. "Yes." The officer studied him like a curious insect. "You do not look dangerous. You look tired." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Travel does that." The officer leaned closer. "Tell me, human, is it true your kind hides inside machines because your bodies are too weak for real battle?" The bar grew quieter. Daniel lifted his glass and took a slow drink. "Some humans hide, some humans build, some humans fight." The officer laughed. "With what strength? Your arms are thin, your bones fragile." Daniel placed the glass back on the table. "Strength is not always visible." The officer tilted his head. "That sounds like fear speaking behind him." The other Cathari officers watched with amused expressions. The officer straightened his posture. "I challenge you, human. Show this room the strength of your species." Daniel shook his head gently. "I came here to rest, not to perform." The officer slammed his hand on the table. "Then you admit weakness?" The bartender shifted nervously. Trouble on Carth Vale usually ended with broken walls. Daniel looked around the room. Every eye was on him. He sighed softly. "What kind of strength do you wish to see?" The officer smiled. "Anything. Lift something, strike something, prove you are not feeble." Daniel reached beside his chair and lifted the small steel case. It looked ordinary. Scuffed edges, heavy locks, industrial markings. He placed it on the table. The officer crossed his arms. "A box will prove nothing." Daniel opened the locks slowly. The lid lifted with a quiet metallic sound. Inside the case rested several pieces of polished metal. Not weapons, not tools, just curved plates and narrow rods. The officer frowned. "Scrap metal." Daniel began assembling the pieces with calm, practiced movements. Click, slide, lock. The parts connected smoothly. Within seconds, a strange device took shape in his hands. A compact frame of steel, dense and precise. The officer leaned closer. "What is that?" Daniel answered quietly. "A human tool." The officer laughed again. "You prove my point. Humans require machines." Daniel looked directly into the officer's eyes. "Yes, we do." Then he stood. The room grew silent. Daniel placed the device against his forearm. The metal frame unfolded and locked along his wrist and hand. Tiny mechanisms hummed softly. The bartender whispered, "What is that thing?" Daniel flexed his fingers. The metal frame mirrored every motion, a portable kinetic amplifier. He said built it years ago, during the siege of Tauron. Engineers needed strength to repair ships under fire. The Cathari officer snorted. "So you need a toy to feel strong?" Daniel nodded calmly. "Yes." The officer leaned forward. "Then prove it." Daniel looked. Around the bar at the far wall stood a thick support beam of station alloy solid metal designed to hold thousands of tons. Daniel walked toward it slowly. Every patron watched in silence. He placed his hand on the beam. The metal device around his arm began to glow. Faint blue motors whispered like distant thunder. The officer folded his arms with a smug smile. The human closed his eyes for a moment, then he squeezed. A deep metallic scream echoed through the bar. The beam bent not slightly, not slowly. It folded inward under Daniel. Grip-like soft clay gasps burst across the room. The Cathari officer eyes widened. Daniel released the beam. The station alloy remained crushed under the shape of his hand. He turned calmly toward the officer. Steel sang in his hands. The officer stared in shock. "Impossible." Daniel walked back to the table. "Humans are weak," he said quietly. "That part is true. Our bones break easily. Our skin tears easily." The room listened without breathing. Daniel continued. "But humans learned something long ago. When the universe is stronger than you, build something stronger than the universe." He lifted the metal device slightly. "This is not strength, this is human thinking." The officer tried to regain his pride. "A machine still fights for you." Daniel shook his head. "No, a human built it, a human controls it, a human decides when it moves." He stepped closer to the officer. "Our bodies may be small, but our ideas are not." The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the device. Daniel continued, speaking calmly. "You see weakness, we see problems waiting to be solved. Low gravity, we build heavier ships. Hostile worlds, we build stronger armor. Enemies larger than us, we build better weapons." He gently tapped the metal frame. "And sometimes we build strength itself." The officer looked back at the crushed beam on the wall. Fear flickered across his silver eyes. Daniel removed the device from his arm. The humming stopped. The metal pieces folded neatly as he disassembled them piece by piece. He placed them back into the steel case. Click slide locked. The room slowly filled with whispers. Daniel closed the lid. Then he looked back at the officer. "You called humans feeble." The officer said nothing. Daniel picked up his glass again. "Maybe we are, but weakness has a strange effect on humans. It makes us build." He drank calmly. "And when humans start building, the universe usually learns to step aside." The Cathari officer slowly backed away. Around the room, alien patrons stared at the bent station beam. Some whispered in awe, others in fear. The bartender leaned toward Daniel. "Remind me never to insult engineers." Daniel smiled faintly. "Good policy." A cargo alarm echoed faintly through the station corridors. Ships prepared for departure. Merchants returned to business. But the story had already begun traveling. By morning, every dock worker on Carthvale would repeat the same words. A Cathari officer mocked a human, called him weak, and the human answered without anger. He simply let the steel sing in his hands across the station. One quiet truth settled into every mind. Humans were not feared because they were strong. Humans were feared because they refused to stay weak, and given time, a human could turn even weakness into a weapon.